Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today in the show, we have Barbara Olson. She's a nurse and senior advisor at the Just Culture Company. Her KevinMD article is titled, "Why a Nurse Should Not Go to Jail." Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Sure. So I'm a registered nurse, and I spent many years as a clinician and a leader in perinatal care. About 15 years ago, I turned my career to patient safety, which is the discipline of preventing people from being harmed because of their need to seek care and how we organize and deliver that care. I changed the focus of my career because, frankly, I became tired of things going wrong, of having unexpected, unwelcome, even tragic things happen, despite the fact that I was working with clinicians who, for the most part, were dedicated, educated, positively motivated people. Right? Most of what troubled me wasn't that there were people who had a purpose to cause harm or who knew that their actions were going to cause harm. These were not bad apples. And I knew at that time, Kevin, that my experience wasn't terribly different from what others were experiencing. In 2001, 2 IOM reports came out that really helped us understand how often people were harmed by their need to seek care. So in 2007, I left clinical practice and completed a 1-year fellowship at the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. And during my year with ISMP, I really came to realize that healthcare did not have the right playbook. The work that we do in healthcare is not designed to produce the outcomes we desire to produce. And when we looked at what other industries were able to do, industries that can reliably do what they intend to do, it turns out they think about the role of humans and system design very differently than the tradition I had come up in. So when we think about what we have to do to get to 1 in a million, 1 in a billion occurrence rate, we really needed to change some things. Specifically, what I saw in healthcare is that we do not factor human fallibility, count how often a person who intends to do something will fall short, and how often they'll make a choice that may compromise safety, but that they don't see at the time. So, with that knowledge, I sort of set forth it in a very different career path. And over the 13 years, I've held leadership roles in large multi-state healthcare organizations, had responsibility for measurably improving patients. And in the past couple of years, I've really worked hand in glove, if you will, with organizations that are striving to look at their system of workplace justice, what many people call a just culture, which is really recognizing, rewarding, tolerating, and punishing in a way that aligns with fair accountability, but also continuous learning. So the case of the nurse in Tennessee causes me a great deal of concern, as I approach it with those eyes.
So this case that we're going to be talking about, it's made national headlines. So why don't we go ahead and summarize that case and talk about your KevinMD article titled, "Why a Nurse Should Not Go to Jail." Just summarize our article, share the story and context and the reason why you decided to write it.
Yeah, thanks. So in the spring of this year, I wrote a letter to the Davidson County, Tennessee judge who sentenced RaDonda Vaught. She is the former Vanderbilt University Medical Center nurse who was convicted on 2 felony counts for the 2017 death of a patient. And I'm going to give you a very abbreviated, high-level view of the case that involved a wrong drug error. So the nurse, not realizing that she had a paralytic agent in her hand, rather than the commonly used drug that relieves anxiety, administered the paralytic in error to the patient, whose name is Charlene Murphy. Miss Murphy was about to undergo a PET scan in the radiology area. By the time the error was discovered, Miss Murphy had been non-responsive for some time, and efforts to resuscitate her were not successful. And I don't want to oversimplify this case, all right? It involves lapses in communication for a patient that received care in 2 very different settings, misunderstanding about the nature and type of monitoring the patient should receive, and vastly different technologies that were supporting medication administration. So when I talk about this case, I say it may be helpful to think about a nurse as beginning her duties in the cockpit of a 787 and then executing care on a glider that requires, while possible to do, a very different mindset, skill set, perhaps, in order to land it safely. So much of the details that I am aware of are available to me because they're in the public record. They are in sworn testimony and they're in a CMS report of deficiencies at Vanderbilt. But I want to be careful and also point out that because the organization has never released their findings, there is much that we will never know. But I'll tell you that based on what is knowable about the nurse's intent and her conduct, I wrote to the judge hoping to influence the sentencing decision. And I made 3 points. I'm going to get to those, but there's a couple things I want to just say real quick. First of all, there are never words to describe what happened to Charlene Murphy. This is the patient who lost her life and whose family lost their mother, their grandmother, whose community lost a friend. And I always try to keep that top of mind whenever we talk about these things. But the second thing I'd really like to call out here is that in efforts to influence the sentencing decision is like way downstream. You know, we are at that point in the delta of a very large river. And the best lessons to be learned from this are way upstream. They're in the organization where RaDonda practiced. They're at the Board of Nursing where she lost her license. And they are certainly where the DA made the choice to prosecute a nurse for on-the-job errors that did not involve knowledge, purpose, or recklessness. So when I wrote to the judge, these were the 3 things I said. RaDonda's conduct doesn't merit jail time. She didn't have purpose, she didn't have knowledge, and she did not act in a reckless fashion. The jury did not find her reckless. They convicted her of criminal negligence, which means she did things she shouldn't have done, and she didn't do things she should have done. And that, sadly, is called humans every day. All right. Humans do these things, clinicians do these things, and we don't go to jail. In the model of workplace justice that I champion, we would call RaDonda's acts human error and at-risk behavior. And they're generally not fireable offenses. And they don't become fireable when something bad happens. If we would not have punished her for giving a drug in error that didn't cause a patient's death, we wouldn't punish her harshly for one that did. I would say, and I just really would pause to point out, that's foundational to a just culture when people strive to have balanced and fair accountability. If it is heinous, it must be dealt with before it causes a harm. Some people have suggested that the degree that RaDonda operated in autopilot mode was rare. But when you actually look at cases that have occurred and occurred and occurred, they're not. A quick scan of widely publicized cases shows that what RaDonda did was very similar to what nurses caring for the Twade twins in 2007 did. Errors that could have made a horrible outcome, but didn't. So I shared with the judge, as I'm sharing with you today, that it's disconcerting to think about healthcare providers making mistakes. But the reality is we don't always have our attention on the things that are the most important. We can't always see that which would seem to be in front of us. There's a lot to attend to in busy, chaotic environments where complex care is delivered. And that was certainly the case as RaDonda navigated between the neuro ICU, where she usually practiced, and the radiology suite where she had never been before. So I don't raise the issue of on-the-job cognitive slips and lapses to excuse them. I simply say that if we fail to design systems that reasonably detect and correct, we will be doing the same thing over and over. So the second thing I asked the judge to recognize is that safety is a property of the system. If we think about the series of events that claim Miss Murphy's life, you can quantify the relative value of each component. So my colleagues in system engineering and human factors estimate that a well-managed barcode scanning process would have reduced the risk of receiving the wrong drug in error by over 99.9%, even when administered by a nurse who, for whatever reason, did not read the label accurately. I'd also, and I did offer, the degree to which the paralytic agent, all right, which is one of the riskiest classes of drugs and one certain to cause grave harm, if used in error, was largely unconstrained in the automated dispensing cabinet cannot be explained. The oversight at the automated dispensing cabinet where the wrong drug error initiated is a head shaker. I'd also point out that while RaDonda's human errors and choices don't make her exemplary, her conduct upon discovering the error that would claim Miss Murphy's life was exemplary. She told what she knew as soon as she knew it to anyone for any purpose in hopes that it could help her patient or another. And I would also point out that she did this in forums that allowed her words to be used against her in a court of law. In the patient safety world, I don't think we ever intended that consequence, but we have longed for people who would stand up and say, this is what happened. And I pointed that out. And then the final thing I asked the judge to consider was the organizational response. Many wonder if the easiest, most obvious thing that horrified leaders and perhaps peers could have seen were the errors that were made by one fallible nurse. And it was tempting, it's even actually reassuring to think that this conduct was so divorced from the ecosystem in which it happened that if we just remove this individual, we would restore system safety. That approach to improvement in justice is highly problematic if we are striving for high reliability. The questions about the model of workplace justice that was applied to RaDonda, who stood at the front end of a complex and probably underguarded system, remain unanswered. But I would say that a more just and sound analysis might have seen Charlene Murphy's tragic death as wholly unacceptable, but also a predictable outcome of a system that was overly reliant on humans and lacked sufficient barriers, redundancies, and opportunities, both at the automated dispensing cabinet and in Barca, to detect and correct the errors that were being set in motion.
So I want to follow up on one of the points that you made. So you mentioned that after she discovered the error, her actions after that were exemplary. So I just want to clarify, after making the mistake, is there anything that RaDonda could have done differently?
After she made the mistake, no. I mean, as I understand it, she was as horrified as an individual could be. And I think, Kevin, that one of the things that actually call her conduct out as being so exemplary is many people would not have been able to hold themselves together, even if they had wanted to say what happened, to move through that gut-wrenching, your heart-dropping moment and realize you've done something that is likely irretrievable and still move forward saying, I want to be part of the solution. There isn't anything that she could have done. In advancing safety or driving improvement, if I were a lawyer, if I were RaDonda's lawyer, I might have a different answer.
Now, what kind of sentence is she facing?
I believe that she could have faced up to 4 to 6 years. That number seems to change. She had 2 different counts, but what the judge ultimately did was to sentence her to 3 years of probation. So she served no jail time.
And after you wrote this letter to the judge, what was the response?
Oh, I heard nothing from the judge, although I do believe I was part of a large number of individuals and organizations who advocated for RaDonda at that point.
Now, can you comment on the effect of this case on the other practicing nurses and healthcare clinicians who are doing their jobs and may hear about this case and potentially be criminally convicted? What's the effect on RaDonda's fellow nurses and healthcare professionals?
So I think the notion that one can be criminally prosecuted for an on-the-job error is chilling. I think that is, something that is scary to contemplate, because I think many clinicians recognize that they are working in systems that are what I would call underguarded. Everyone wants to deliver the best possible care, to have outcomes that fail so rarely that we can't even count them. Yet I believe that people know every day they stand in the gap between something that is probably organized to fail 1 in 10,000 times or 1 in 100,000, where we're actually hoping it will be 1 in a million. So I think that the stress of that lives with us all the time. And when you actually serve up a case like the RaDonda Vaught case, it is, minimally disconcerting. I think chilling is probably a better word.
And as far as, from Vanderbilt's perspective, did they make any changes going forward as a result of this case?
So I really can't speak to Vanderbilt's response. There's some data that appeared in the CMS report that was conducted 11 months after this event that gives some cues and clues about the processes that were changed. I believe Vanderbilt is now starting to share more in terms of the risk reduction strategies that they have put into place, as have many others, as they are really examining how their systems might have compared to those that were at Vanderbilt, again, 5 years ago.
We're talking to Barbara Olson. She's a nurse and senior advisor of the Just Culture Company. Her KevinMD article is titled, "Why a Nurse Should Not Go to Jail." So Barbara, going forward, what kind of changes would you like to see with the error reporting system or any other changes that you'd like to see as a result of this case?
So thank you for asking that, because boy, is there something. I think what I would say, Kevin, is that there really is an opportunity to ask us all, and I say ask clinicians when they are patients, ask patients, ask payers, accreditors, watchdog organizations, frankly, to be more picky. When I fly, my airline can tell me how safe I am, and they can tell me how safe my luggage is. And and I know that I'm a whole lot safer than my luggage because I am more valuable than my luggage. And when we say, I think, or we thought our patients are safe, know how safe, demand to know, is the likelihood of a catastrophic failure in a radiology trajectory or a cath lab trajectory, is that 1 in 10,000? Is it 1 in 100,000? Is 1 in a million? What do you want to sleep with at night? And don't assume that good people working hard will close that gap. Once we know those numbers, we may not like those numbers, but it gives us the basis to measure and improve against something that people can get their head around. I may choose not to, I wouldn't fly if there was a 1 in 1,000 chance my plane was going down, but I would be in a position to know that. So I think, as we look at leaders, at individuals, I think we have to have a good faith belief that they believe what they believe. But I am challenging to say we should know that which can be measured and counted. And we need everybody to have a shared mental model about how safe we can be and what it looks to measurably get there.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Yeah, so beyond the, get a little bit picky, right? I think a lot of what I would share is that many of the elements in a roadmap to improve safety are really sound. Some of the things that we see perhaps clinically as being check the box compliance driven activities, like perform a pre-procedure timeout, right? Or share what didn't go well at the end of a shift. Those things work, right? The ability to actually say, we detected and corrected something that could have gone wrong is a huge win. People are giving an inordinate amount of their time and talent to engage in safety behaviors, and not always because they appreciate them, but because you simply have to do them. My challenge would be find the value in it. These are things that should make it easier to be on a team, a better place to go to work. And I guess the advice or the caveat I would say to anyone in a leadership role is like, show me the beef. You can tell I'm old when I say something like that, but it's like, what are you doing with that information? No one is going to report the same thing over and over, but when we hear reasonable things about what is preventing people from getting work done that's safe, that's efficient, that's satisfying, act on them, celebrate them, share them, like shout it from the rooftops. So I think, that whole issue of, I'm going to share something and I'm going to get feedback is irreplaceable, in a culture that really gets to a place of high reliability.
Barbara, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kevin.